Robert Lighthizer, China's fourfold war material production capacity represents an existential threat to U.S. national security. Introduction. On February 2, 2025, Robert Lighthizer, the former U.S. trade representative under President Trump, delivered a compelling warning about China's growing economic and military capabilities. In a CBS News interview, he described China as an existential threat to the United States, emphasizing the need for urgent action to address the significant trade imbalance and the implications thereof. Key themes: 1. Existential threat and strategic decoupling. Lighthizer's assertions are anchored in the belief that China's rising military and economic power, paired with its state-directed economic strategies and espionage activities, poses a severe risk to U.S. national security. He argues for a strategic decoupling from China, advocating for a balanced trade relationship that would necessitate imposing tariffs as a tool to achieve this balance. He suggests that tariffs on Chinese imports could be substantial, potentially reaching up to 60%. 2. The necessity of tariffs. Lighthizer strongly supports the implementation of large tariffs to address the trade imbalance, which he estimates costs the U.S. about $1 trillion annually. He believes that tariffs would not only limit Chinese imports but also encourage domestic manufacturing, revitalizing the U.S. economy and job market. He envisions a manufacturing renaissance driven by a combination of tariffs, tax cuts, and regulatory reductions. 3. Economic ramifications and job creation. Critics, including economists like Mary Lovely, counter Lighthizer's proposals by warning that tariffs could lead to higher prices for American consumers and potential job losses in sectors reliant on imported goods. They argue that while tariffs may protect certain industries, the overall economic impact could be detrimental, damaging consumer purchasing power and leading to job losses in other sectors. 4. Risks of retaliation and trade war. The potential for retaliation from trading partners poses another significant concern. Canada and Mexico have indicated intentions to impose their own tariffs in response to U.S. actions. Such a tit-for-tat scenario could escalate into a broader trade conflict, undermining the intended benefits of Lighthizer's tariff strategy. Timeline of events. Pre-2000s, U.S. manufacturing jobs remain stable as global economies become more intertwined. 2000 to 2010, a decline in U.S. manufacturing occurs, with approximately 6 million jobs lost as China's global economic presence grows. 2016, Donald Trump's campaign emphasizes the need for tariffs on imports, particularly targeting China. 2017 to 2021, Lighthizer serves as U.S. trade representative, negotiating trade agreements and implementing tariffs on Chinese goods. 2025, in an interview, Lighthizer reiterates the necessity of substantial tariffs, framing them as essential for national security and economic stability. Commonalities and differences. While both Lighthizer and economic analysts acknowledge the imbalance in U.S. China trade and discuss the importance of tariffs, they diverge significantly on the expected outcomes. Lighthizer believes that tariffs will bolster U.S. manufacturing and enhance national security, whereas economists like Mary Lovely caution against the potential adverse effects on consumers and overall job growth. Conclusion. Lighthizer's advocacy for tariffs signals a significant shift in U.S. trade policy aimed at countering perceived threats from China. His warnings underscore the urgent need for a re-evaluation of U.S.-China relations, highlighting concerns that resonate deeply within the national security framework. However, the debate around the economic implications of such measures continues, with critics warning of the potential fallout from a trade strategy heavily reliant on tariffs. As this narrative unfolds, it remains to be seen whether Lighthizer's vision for a manufacturing renaissance will materialize, or if the risks associated with his proposals will overshadow their intended benefits. Robert Lighthizer, the former U.S. trade representative under President Trump, has raised significant concerns regarding China's economic practices, characterizing the nation as an existential threat to U.S. national security. His analysis is predicated on the substantial trade imbalance between the U.S. and China, which he estimates transfers around $1 trillion annually from the U.S. to China, thereby enhancing China's military and industrial capabilities. This transfer is seen as particularly alarming in the context of potential military conflict. Existential threat and strategic decoupling. Lighthizer's perspective is grounded in the belief that China's increasing military and economic power, along with its espionage tactics and state-directed economic strategies, necessitates a reassessment of U.S. China relations. He advocates for strategic decoupling, which involves reducing economic interdependence while striving for a more balanced trade relationship. He proposes imposing tariffs on Chinese imports, suggesting that rates could reach as high as 60%. This approach aims to deter what he perceives as unfair trade practices and restore equity. Economic impact and job creation. While Lighthizer argues that tariffs will bolster domestic manufacturing and job growth, economists like Mary Lovely present a counter-narrative. They suggest that tariffs may inflate prices for American consumers and could lead to job losses in sectors reliant on imported goods. Critics argue that while specific industries might benefit, the broader economic impact could reduce purchasing power and harm employment opportunities. Potential backlash and trade war. Lighthizer's proposals carry the risk of provoking retaliation from key trading partners, including Canada and Mexico, who may impose their own tariffs in response. This could escalate into a wider trade conflict, undermining the intended benefits of his tariff strategy. The timeline of U.S.-China trade relations highlights a significant decline in U.S. manufacturing jobs since the early 2000s, coinciding with China's rise as a global economic power. Tariffs as a solution. Lighthizer's call for substantial tariffs is reminiscent of historical perspectives on trade, where tariffs have often been debated as a tool for protecting domestic industries. However, the historical context reveals that high tariffs can lead to negative economic outcomes, as seen during the Great Depression. The assertion that tariffs are merely a tax on foreign countries is also challenged. The reality is that importers in the U.S. bear the cost of tariffs, which often gets passed down to consumers. Counterintuitive insights. 1. Tariffs as a tax on consumers. Contrary to Lighthizer's assertion that tariffs penalize foreign countries, the economic consensus is that U.S. consumers ultimately bear the burden of these tariffs through higher prices. This dynamic challenges the notion that tariffs can effectively target foreign adversaries without domestic repercussions. 2. Job creation versus job loss. Lighthizer posits that tariffs will create jobs and stimulate manufacturing in the U.S. However, historical data and economic analyses suggest that while certain sectors may see job growth, the overall employment landscape could face challenges, disproportionately affecting industries dependent on imported goods. 3. Retaliation and trade wars. The expectation that tariffs could lead to a straightforward resolution of trade imbalances is complicated by the likelihood of retaliatory measures from other nations. This reaction can lead to a trade war, which often exacerbates economic issues rather than resolving them. For historical precedent, the historical context of tariffs reveals a complex relationship between trade barriers and economic health. High tariffs have not consistently led to the desired outcomes of job creation or economic stability, as evidenced by past economic downturns. 5. Manufacturing renaissance. Lighthizer's vision of a manufacturing renaissance driven by tariffs may overlook the nuanced realities of global supply chains and consumer behavior. The expectation that domestic producers will easily fill the gap left by reduced imports may not materialize as anticipated. 6. Strategic decoupling complexity. The idea of strategic decoupling from China presents significant challenges, as complete disengagement from such a major economic partner could have unintended consequences for U.S. businesses and consumers, complicating the trade landscape further. In summary, while Lighthizer's advocacy for tariffs and strategic decoupling underscores concerns about national security and economic fairness, the counterintuitive realities surrounding tariffs, consumer impact, job dynamics, and historical lessons complicate the narrative. The interplay between protectionist policies and global economic interdependence requires careful consideration to avoid unintended negative consequences. Robert Lighthizer's perspective on China's economic practices, particularly his assertion that it poses an existential threat to U.S. national security, offers crucial insights often overlooked in discussions about trade and tariffs. Below are significant points from Lighthizer's viewpoint that warrant deeper examination, along with their implications. 1. Existential threat framing. Lighthizer's characterization of China as an existential threat is significant because it frames the economic relationship within a national security context rather than a purely economic one. This viewpoint suggests that the stakes of trade policies extend beyond economics into the realm of geopolitical stability and military readiness. The perception that economic dependency could lead to vulnerability in a conflict scenario emphasizes the need for a strategic reassessment of U.S. China relations. This framing can influence policymakers and public opinion, justifying protective measures like tariffs not merely as economic decisions but as necessary steps for safeguarding national interests. 2. The $1 trillion transfer. Lighthizer states that approximately $1 trillion is transferred annually from the U.S. to China due to trade imbalances. This figure is significant because it quantifies the economic impact of U.S. China relations and underscores the potential resources that could have been allocated to bolster the U.S. economy. Many discussions focus on job losses or trade deficits but overlook the sheer scale of financial outflow and its implications for U.S. manufacturing capabilities, technological innovation, and overall economic resilience. Understanding this transfer helps contextualize the urgency behind Lighthizer's call for tariffs and decoupling. 3. Strategic decoupling. The concept of strategic decoupling is another critical element of Lighthizer's argument that may be underestimated. It suggests a deliberate effort to reduce economic interdependence with China, which could lead to a more balanced trade relationship. This decoupling resonates with concerns about supply chain vulnerabilities, especially highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the implications of decoupling extend beyond trade. They could reshape global economic alliances, influence technological competition, and alter the landscape of international relations. The strategic decoupling approach may also lead to increased domestic production, which Lighthizer argues is essential for national security. 4. Tariffs as a tool for economic policy. While many critics highlight the negative consequences of tariffs, such as increased consumer prices and potential job losses, Lighthizer frames tariffs as a necessary tool for national security and economic revival. His proposal for substantial tariffs up to 60% on Chinese imports raises questions about the efficacy of protectionist measures versus free trade principles. The potential for tariffs to foster a resurgence in American manufacturing by making imported goods more expensive could be significant, but is often overshadowed by fears of economic retaliation and inflation. This dichotomy merits further exploration, as the long-term effects of tariffs on domestic job growth versus consumer cost remain a contentious debate. 5. Retaliation and trade war risks. Lighthizer acknowledges the risk of retaliation from trading partners like Canada and Mexico, which signifies the potential escalation into a broader trade conflict. This aspect is crucial as it illustrates the interconnectedness of global trade relationships and how unilateral actions can destabilize not only U.S. trade dynamics but also its international standing. The potential for a trade war could lead to a cycle of retaliatory tariffs which might harm U.S. industries reliant on imported materials or components, suggesting that while Lighthizer's approach aims to protect American interests, it could inadvertently create new vulnerabilities. 6. Economic versus national security perspectives. The divergence between Lighthizer's national security-centric view and economists' concerns regarding tariffs reflects a broader debate about the role of government in managing trade. Economists like Mary Lovely argue that while tariffs might protect certain sectors, they could lead to broader adverse effects on the economy. including higher prices for consumers and job losses in other industries. This tension between protecting national security and ensuring economic prosperity is critical as it highlights the complexity of trade policy and the need for balanced approaches that consider both perspectives. 7. Implications for future trade policy. Lighthizer advocates for a comprehensive economic policy that combines tariffs with tax cuts, deregulation, and increased domestic manufacturing. This multifaceted approach is significant because it suggests a shift in how trade policy is formulated, moving from a solely market-driven perspective to one that integrates national security considerations. The implications for future trade policies could be profound, potentially leading to an era where economic strategies are closely aligned with national security objectives, reshaping the global trade landscape. In conclusion, the insights presented by Robert Lighthizer regarding the U.S. China economic relationship and trade policies reveal significant yet often overlooked dimensions of national security. Economic strategy and geopolitical dynamics. Understanding these elements is essential for grasping the complexities of contemporary trade discussions and their potential long-term ramifications for both the U.S. and global economies. 1. Existential threat and strategic decoupling. Robert Lighthizer argues that China's increasing military and economic power combined with espionage and state-driven economic policies constitutes an existential threat to U.S. national security. He advocates for a strategic decoupling from China, emphasizing the need for balanced trade relations. This perspective highlights a critical shift in U.S. foreign policy, suggesting that economic interdependence could lead to vulnerabilities in national security. 2. Tariffs as a policy tool. Lighthizer proposes substantial tariffs, potentially up to 60%, on Chinese imports as a means to address the trade imbalance and discourage unfair practices. He believes these tariffs would not only limit Chinese goods in the U.S. market but also spur domestic manufacturing and job creation. This raises important questions about the effectiveness of tariffs in achieving such economic goals as well as the broader implications for U.S. trade policy. 3. Economic impact and consumer consequences. Critics, including economists like Mary Lovely, warn that the imposition of tariffs could lead to higher prices for American consumers and potential job losses in import-dependent industries. The debate centers around whether tariffs will ultimately protect U.S. jobs or hinder economic growth by increasing costs for consumers and businesses. This point underscores the complexity of trade policy and its multifaceted economic impacts. For potential backlash and trade war dynamics, Lighthizer's tariff proposals risk provoking retaliation from key trading partners, notably Canada and Mexico, potentially igniting a broader trade conflict. This raises concerns about the unintended consequences of aggressive trade measures, including the possibility of escalating tensions and economic repercussions that could undermine the intended benefits of Lighthizer's strategy. Understanding the geopolitical landscape in this context is essential for evaluating the sustainability of U.S. China trade relations. 1. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. This act raised U.S. tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods in an effort to protect American industries during the Great Depression. The intention was to shield domestic businesses from foreign competition, but it led to retaliatory tariffs from other countries, exacerbating the economic downturn and contributing to a significant decline in international trade. Economists widely agree that the act worsened the Great Depression, demonstrating the potential negative consequences of protectionist policies. 2. The trade wars of the 1980s. During the 1980s, the U.S. engaged in trade disputes with Japan largely due to allegations of unfair trade practices, including dumping and currency manipulation. In response, the U.S. imposed tariffs on Japanese electronics and automobiles. This period is often cited as a precursor to contemporary trade tensions with China, highlighting the long-standing issues of trade imbalances and competitive practices. The consequences included increased prices for consumers and strained diplomatic relations. 3. The U.S. China trade war 2018-present. initiated by the Trump administration. This trade war involved a series of tariffs imposed by the U.S. on Chinese goods to counteract what was perceived as unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. China retaliated with tariffs on U.S. exports, leading to a tit-for-tat escalation that impacted global markets. The trade war raised concerns over economic stability, job losses in certain sectors, and inflationary pressures on consumers, echoing the fears raised by Robert Lighthizer regarding national security and economic sovereignty in the context of U.S. China relations. Robert Lighthizer, the former U.S. trade representative, has raised significant alarms regarding China's economic and military ascent, labeling it as an existential threat to U.S. national security. His perspective is shaped by a trade imbalance that he estimates costs the United States roughly $1 trillion annually, which he believes bolsters China's military and industrial capabilities. This situation, according to Lighthizer, necessitates urgent action on the part of the U.S. to ensure its economic and military readiness in the face of potential conflict. Future outlook and predictions. 1. Increasing tensions and strategic decoupling. The U.S. will likely continue to pursue strategic decoupling from China, leading to a separation of supply chains and economic interactions. This trend is anticipated to gain momentum as the U.S. government and businesses recognize the risks associated with dependence on Chinese manufacturing and technology. The implications will be profound, potentially reshaping global trade dynamics and leading to the emergence of alternative supply chains in countries like India, Vietnam, and Mexico. 2. Implementation of tariffs and trade policies. Expect a gradual implementation of high tariffs on a broad range of Chinese imports, possibly reaching the levels Lighthizer has suggested, up to 60%. These tariffs will be justified as necessary for protecting U.S. national security and promoting domestic manufacturing. However, the economic fallout may lead to higher consumer prices, sparking debate and opposition from various economic sectors and consumer advocacy groups. 3. Domestic manufacturing resurgence. Lighthizer envisions a manufacturing renaissance in the U.S. driven by tariffs and supportive policies such as tax cuts and deregulation. Predictions indicate a modest increase in domestic production and job creation in specific sectors, particularly in technology and manufacturing. Nonetheless, this renaissance may be uneven and limited to certain industries, with ongoing challenges in sectors that rely on global supply chains. 4. Economic backlash and consumer impact. As tariffs increase, consumers may face rising costs for goods, leading to a potential backlash against the government's trade policies. Economists predict that average households could see a significant increase in monthly expenses, stressing the need for policy adjustments to mitigate adverse effects. Public sentiment may shift against tariffs if the economic pain becomes too pronounced, potentially influencing future elections and trade policies. 5. Escalating trade wars. The potential for retaliation from trading partners, including Canada and Mexico, could lead to a broader trade war. Such conflicts can disrupt global markets and lead to economic instability, with implications for U.S. exports and international relations. As countries respond to U.S. tariffs with their own, expect a cycle of escalating measures that could hinder global economic recovery post-pandemic. 6. Geopolitical realignments. The U.S. may seek to strengthen alliances with other nations to counterbalance China's influence. This could manifest in new trade agreements, defense pacts, and collaborative technological initiatives. Countries in Southeast Asia and Europe may find themselves increasingly courted by the U.S. as it attempts to build coalitions against perceived threats from China. 7. Technological competition and innovation. As the U.S. aims to enhance its technological capabilities, there will likely be increased investment in research and development, particularly in emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and renewable energy. This focus will be aimed at maintaining a competitive edge over China, which is heavily investing in similar technologies. 8. Long-term economic consequences. Over the next decade, the long-term economic consequences of tariffs and trade policies will become clearer. While Lighthizer and supporters advocate for a protective stance, critics warn that prolonged tariffs could lead to structural weaknesses in the U.S. economy, including diminished competitiveness and an over-reliance on domestic production capabilities that may not be able to meet global standards. In conclusion, the future relationship between the U.S. and China will be characterized by increased tension, strategic decoupling, and a focus on national security through trade policy. While attempts to bolster domestic manufacturing and protect national interests are likely to continue, the economic ramifications of these policies will necessitate careful consideration to avoid unintended consequences for American consumers and the broader economy. The coming years will test the balance between national security imperatives and economic realities in an increasingly complex global landscape.